At the age of 16, I faced a heartbreaking situation when my parents and my twin sister decided to kick me out of our home. With no place to go, I found myself living in a tent, struggling fiercely for years just to survive. I fought hard and ultimately managed to secure a house of my own. However, just when I believed I could finally enjoy some peace, my family showed up uninvited. My sister, who now has a family of her own, came with her husband and children, demanding that they be allowed to move in with me. This was particularly painful considering that my sister was the one who had previously insisted that my parents throw me out when I was only 16. She claimed there wasn't enough space for me in our home back then. I've dedicated 12 long years of my life to achieving the stability I have now, and it feels unfair that my sister expects to disrupt it because she is pregnant with her fourth child. At 28 years old, I have been dealing with the emotional toxicity from my parents since I was a child. My twin sister, rather than being my ally, has often acted like a weight holding me down. While many people view twins as partners in crime, my experiences have been quite the opposite. Instead, my sister pulls me back whenever she gets the chance. The bullying I endured during my childhood was already challenging, but it was made worse by my sister's actions. After having been forced out of our family home at such a young age, she re-entered my life seeking to take advantage of my current living situation. Despite being the cause of my struggles, she now wants to bring her entire family into my house. Her entitlement has been a consistent theme in our relationship, and I believe this stems from the poor parenting we both received. My parents always wanted a daughter and expressed that they were disappointed they had a son along with me. They even told me straight to my face that if it had only been me, they would have considered terminating the pregnancy. Their desire for a girl overshadowed my existence, and I often felt like I owed my life to my sister. Growing up felt like living in the shadow of someone who was favored and adored. My childhood was filled with moments where I constantly felt unwanted and unappreciated. In our shared household, everything revolved around my sister. Despite us being twins, I was never allowed to play with her toys, and she received new clothes while I barely got a few basic items each year. If we didn't share the same birthday, I often wondered if I would have even been celebrated at all. All the little things I did receive were not out of love but simply to avoid judgment from relatives who might notice how little I had. The only bright spot during my formative years was my grandfather, who seen through the facade my parents put up. Sadly, he passed away when I was just 13 years old, and with his loss, my sense of support vanished. I was left alone in a tiny house where my sister and I shared a room, which really meant that I had a small bed shoved into a corner of her space filled with her belongings. My presence was tolerated only at night when I was allowed to sleep there. During the day, I had no choice but to lie on the couch, even when I was sick, because my sister needed her privacy. As I grew older, I yearned for the day when I could turn 18 and finally move out on my own. However, it seemed clear that my family was eager to push me out even sooner. When my sister turned 16 and became pregnant by a young man with no direction in life, my parents decided to marry them. Without much thought, they brought this man into our already cramped home, forcing me to move out of my room. Our house had only 2 small rooms and limited space. I requested to sleep on the couch, but my father dismissed my plea, sharing that he too had to couch surf due to my mother's snoring. Faced with a lack of options, I was told to find a place to stay. To add to the insult, my sister's new partner casually remarked how easy it was to establish a life for oneself, despite the fact that he had been living off the system and had not achieved anything meaningful. My relatives lived far away, and my parents had threatened me not to reach out to them, fearing that it would expose the dysfunction in our family. I even sought refuge by asking friends if I could crash on their couches, but the emotional scars and burdens my family placed upon me would linger long beyond my physical living situation. I reached out to several of my friends, hoping they could let me crash on their couches for a while. Unfortunately, none of them could help me out. It was hard to understand why their parents would allow me to stay, especially since my own parents had kicked me out. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, one of my classmates offered me a spot in the garage where he lived. I was grateful for that, and it worked for a few months. However, things took a turn when his parents discovered I was staying there. They quickly asked me to leave. For the next few days, I found myself sleeping on a bench outside. Those nights were long and lonely, and I felt so lost. Eventually, the police found me and decided to take me back home. When I arrived, my parents spun a story claiming I had run away, and in an unexpected turn, they welcomed me back that night. But it wasn't really a return to a warm home. My father went to a junkyard and brought back a makeshift tent, telling me to set it up in the backyard. He made it clear that this was my space, a reward for not causing trouble and a way to keep me out of sight. Living in that tent was definitely better than sleeping outside. Summer was manageable, but the harsh winter quickly became unbearable. One frigid night, I felt like I was on the brink of freezing to death. I knocked on the door to the house, desperately hoping for help, but no one answered. I tried banging on my parents' bedroom window, but my dad's angry shout told me to be quiet or face his wrath. I felt completely hopeless, and as tears streamed down my face, I spent the night crying. The following day, I realized I needed to find a job that could offer me not just money, but also a place to sleep. I eventually came across a bakery shop looking for help. The shop was a good distance away, about 20 miles, but the owner was willing to give me a place to stay and food as part of the deal. The bakery was run from his home, and he just needed an extra set of hands. He even offered me a spot in his backyard to live, but I had to clean up the space first. Desperate and at my lowest point, I accepted the job. My sister didn't seem to mind that I was leaving. In fact, she seemed pleased, telling me there was no room for me at home. No one else cared to ask where I was headed. I got to work cleaning up the backyard, which was a mess of flour, sugar, and the occasional rodent scavenging for food. It was tough at first, but slowly, I started to feel more comfortable living there. Although I had to drop out of high school with only a few months left until graduation, I was determined to make the best of my situation. Some friends suggested I just stay in my parents' backyard and finish school, but I had lost all motivation. I focused on my job and started to save money. It became clear that I needed to develop new skills if I wanted to improve my job opportunities. Since my dad was a mechanic, I had spent my childhood playing with his toolbox and helping him with plumbing around the house. I used that experience to my advantage and saved up to take a course. Eventually, I landed a job at a car plant, where I worked incredibly hard to climb my way up the ladder. Now, I proudly hold the position of supervisor. Just recently, one of my old friends reached out with a pressing situation. He needed to sell his house quickly due to a divorce and offered me a great deal, including a generous discount on the price and the option to pay the down payment in parts. It was a tempting offer, and just 2 weeks ago, I made the decision to buy the house. Today was a surprise, though. I opened my door to find my parents, my sister, and Bill standing there. I was taken aback because I hadn't spoken to them in years. They hadn't reached out to me at all. My new home is about 15 miles away from where they live, so I couldn't figure out how they showed up here. I have cut off contact with all our relatives, both in person and on social media, but I do have one neighbor who is a friend. He might have seen pictures of my house on Facebook and mentioned it to my parents. Still, I was baffled about how they managed to find the exact address. As they stepped inside, they took charge and made their way into my living area. My mom and dad congratulated me on my accomplishment, expressing their pride in me. I gave them a smile and offered them a chair, but I had to admit I didn't have much furniture yet. All I owned was a bed, a few chairs, and a table. My parents settled in and started asking questions about how I managed to buy the house and the deal I had made. It was hard to believe for my family that I, at the age of 35, had actually managed to purchase my own house while they were still stuck in the cycle of renting. My sister and her husband, who has never really contributed much in terms of responsibility or support, casually walked through my home as if they were considering moving in without even asking me. I felt a mix of confusion and irritation as I asked them why they had suddenly decided to show up in my life. They nonchalantly responded that they were just checking on me. It struck me as odd, considering they hadn't bothered to check on me when I needed support the most. As they wandered through my house, they began sharing their latest life updates, which felt intrusive and unwelcome. My sister mentioned that our dad had developed hypertension, and then she moved on to talk about her own life. She has 3 children now, ages 14, 9, and 4, and is pregnant once again. I sat silently, nodding along, trying to decide whether I should express my frustration or simply ask them to leave. My mother then chimed in, asking me if I was getting married or if I had a girlfriend. I bluntly told her that it was none of her business. She responded by questioning why I seemed so cranky and wondered if everything was all right. I told her everything was fine until they showed up. She laughed and suggested that if settling into a new house was overwhelming, she could help me out, which annoyed me further. Just then, my sister excitedly declared that she had decided they would take the bedroom with the attached balcony and bathroom. She was thrilled at the prospect of having her own bathroom, suggesting that the kids could take the other room. I was taken aback and exploded with disbelief. What was happening here? My sister explained that I had a 3-bedroom house and, being a single man, I didn't need that much space. She reminded me of the time when I used to live in a tent, implying that moving into a proper bedroom was a significant upgrade for me. She believed I should be generous and let her family stay since my house was big enough to accommodate them all. As she spoke, my parents interrupted her to attend to her youngest son, who was crying for attention. I looked at my parents in disbelief and asked them what my sister had just said. My dad mentioned how crowded their own small house had become, with her oldest son sleeping on the couch while the middle child shared a bed with my parents and the youngest with my sister. To top it off, my sister was pregnant again, creating an even greater need for a larger space. In a moment of outrage, I shouted that I wasn't going to take anyone into my house, and my sister lashed out, claiming that I owed her for bringing me into this world, as if that was some sort of justification for her entitlement. She went on to say that our parents would have never had me if she hadn't been there first, so I owed it to her to provide her with a place to stay. The atmosphere became tense as she continued to complain about how crowded her home had become, saying she could hardly breathe. I retorted that I was grateful for her bringing me into this world, but that didn't mean I should have to take on my sister and her entire family. I demanded they leave my house immediately. My dad attempted to assert his authority, raising his voice and insisting that as the man of the house, I had a duty to take care of my sister. I shot back, explaining I had no obligations to her, but as a parent, they should have been taking care of me. It was a stark contrast to my own experiences. Dad was okay with his grandson sleeping on the couch, yet he had thrown me out when I had asked for the same treatment. I vented about how I had lived in a garage filled with rodents and spent a decade in a dingy apartment, while no one from my family bothered to check on me. As my mom started sobbing and reached out for a hug, I blocked her and reiterated my demand that they leave. My sister's husband chimed in, trying to relate by saying he had also endured tough times without complaint. I gestured for him to be quiet and tried to keep my composure. My sister began angrily cursing me for raising my voice at her husband, to which I responded by warning her to get out if she didn't want me to take further action. I forcefully ushered them out without letting anyone speak another word. My anger was boiling over. I could see their toxicity and narcissism on full display, and now they were trying to exploit my success. I was no longer the 16-year-old who would just follow orders. I had grown up and wouldn't hesitate to call the police if they continued to pester me. The situation became even more alarming when my sister and her irresponsible husband broke into my house, showing a complete lack of respect for my boundaries. Some people wondered in the comments if my sister had offered to pay rent, but the answer was a resounding no. She couldn't afford rent, and both she and her husband had become nothing more than freeloaders in my eyes. Her junkie friends and their children have been a burden on my parents for the last 12 years. They have been taking advantage of my parents' kindness, and now they want to extend that same behavior to me. It's clear that my parents aren't thrilled about continuing to support them, as I could see the frustration in their eyes during their last visit. Instead of addressing the issue directly and kicking her out, they seem to believe it would be easier to push her and her family off onto me. Just a week after their initial visit, my mom came to my house once again. This time, she was straight to the point and insisted that I should let my sister move in with me. I immediately refused, making it clear that I wasn't interested. My mom went on about how difficult it was for them to accommodate so many people in their small house, but I held my ground and said no. Then, she changed her approach and tried to intimidate me with her words. She pointed out that I live alone in a big house and work long hours, suggesting that it wouldn't be safe for me on my own. She argued that if I allowed my sister to stay, it would make my home safer and I would even get help with cleaning, laundry, and dishes. I stood firm and told her no again, asking her to leave my house. I wanted nothing to do with them. A few days later, I received concerning news from one of my neighbors. He told me he saw a pregnant woman, a man, and a young boy hanging around my property, peering in through the windows and wandering around in the backyard. It felt like they were attempting to break in. This neighbor, an elderly man who spends his afternoons sitting on his porch, noticed their suspicious behavior and came over to inform me as a precaution. I appreciated his kindness and gave him my phone number, asking him to call me if he saw them again. At the time, my house didn't have security cameras, but I had plans to install them that weekend. Little did I know that my sister and her family would break into my home before I had the chance. 2 days later, I got a call from my neighbor, who suspected someone had entered my house. I rushed home in a panic, and to my horror, he was right. My sister and her partner had broken in through a back window. When I confronted them, my sister claimed they had no other choice because I was being unreasonable. She told me that they were living there now, and I would just have to accept it. I was stunned by her sense of entitlement. Her partner, Bill, came out from the room they had turned into their bedroom and smugly commented on how easy it had been for them to get in. In that moment of anger, I charged at Bill, and my sister stepped between us, trying to protect him. I pushed her aside and punched him in the face. In response, their 14-year-old son attacked me with a bottle, causing a cut on my head. Although the blow wasn't serious, I felt dizzy and close to losing consciousness, but my anger kept me focused. The situation quickly escalated, and they all panicked when they saw the blood. My sister called my parents to inform them of the chaos as Bill and his son started to clean up the mess. My neighbor, witnessing everything, called the police. My sister and Bill began apologizing and pleaded with me not to have their son arrested. I was adamant that they would all face consequences for their actions. When the cops arrived, I gave my statement, but my sister denied everything. She claimed they were just visiting and that their son's actions were a prank, insisting I had hurt myself due to my anger. My parents showed up and pressured me to drop the charges against my sister and Bill, ganging up on me and trying to convince me that I was lying and using the police to settle a score. Thankfully, my neighbor supported me by providing his statement, leading the police to arrest them. They spent the night in jail because my parents couldn't afford to bail them out. The following day, they were brought before a judge. While they faced trial, I went to the hospital to have my wounds treated. The doctor examined me for internal injuries, and I was told to take a few days off to recover. I pressed charges for assault and also sought compensation for my medical expenses, which the court agreed to. My parents kept trying to convince me to drop the charges. However, I made it clear that I would pursue legal action against them if necessary. I felt compelled to take serious action, so I threatened to sue them for orchestrating the assault against me. Given that her son is a minor, he was subject to juvenile law, which meant he received a week in a juvenile facility as punishment. Alongside that, his parents were held responsible and required to pay restitution covering lost wages and medical expenses resulting from the incident. My sister and her partner, Bill, faced significant fines as well for their involvement. However, they managed to negotiate a deal where part of the fines could be exchanged for community service instead. It has now been a week since that troubling event, and I have not heard anything from them. I sincerely hope they have learned a valuable lesson and that they will keep their distance from me moving forward. In an unexpected turn of events, it seems my parents are not done bothering me just yet. Just yesterday, they showed up at my house again, and I felt so overwhelmed that I slammed the door right in their faces. They didn't leave, though. They lingered outside for nearly an hour, pleading with me to let them in and hear what they had to say. Eventually, I felt I had no choice but to let them in. I wished I could simply shout from the window, threatening to throw them out like my dad had done to me when I was just a child. When I finally opened the door, I asked them why they were back at my house. They started sobbing, claiming they needed my help. I immediately suspected it had something to do with my sister, so I told them I wanted no part in that. To my surprise, they explained that their situation was about them rather than my sister. My dad began to explain that he was aging and becoming more fragile, unable to work like he used to. He went on to say that their house had been in disrepair for years and was falling apart. I interrupted him, demanding to know what they were trying to get at. It turned out that both he and my mom wanted to move in with me, believing that as their responsible son, I had an obligation to take them in. I felt anger rise within me. They were anything but responsible parents. I asked them about their house, questioning if they intended to terminate the lease, and they shockingly revealed that they planned to give the house to my sister. It was clear to me that they were trying to exploit me. First, they attempted to offload my sister onto me, and when that plan failed, they were back with a new scheme. I firmly stated that my house would not be available to anyone. They then proposed that my sister would pay me rent to live in my house, which I could use to help cover my mortgage. I quickly dismissed that idea, explaining that I didn't need her rent and that she shouldn't be worrying about my financial situation when she had her own challenges to face. My mother began crying, telling me how difficult it was for my sister to make ends meet, especially since her children all slept in the same room. I retorted that it was not my responsibility if she chose to expand her family without proper financial planning. My parents continued to plead, saying that I was refusing to help anyone, neither my sister nor them. They insisted that I should at least allow them to move in with me because they believed my house was too big for just one person. I snapped back, stating that I didn't plan on being single forever. They attempted to use emotional manipulation, reminding me that I should take care of my aging parents. I yelled back at them about karma, reminding them how they had thrown me out of the house years ago. I firmly told them that what was happening to them now was a direct consequence of their actions. After that, I opened the door for them, and they left with disappointed expressions. I was unbothered by their opinions of me. I was determined not to be a doormat for anyone or to yield to their demands. Now, moving on to another story, I faced a situation regarding my daughter. I rejected a Father's Day gift from her, still feeling hurt and angry about my ex-wife's affair, which my daughter had kept from me. It had been a difficult year since my divorce from my ex-wife, who confessed to having an affair and subsequently moved in with her partner, whom she eventually married. This revelation hit me hard, especially because my daughter, now 17, had known about the affair but had chosen to hide it. She claimed it was to avoid breaking up the family. It was painful for me to learn that she had kept such a significant secret, but I tried to move past it. Even though my daughter continued to apologize for her decision, I reassured her that it was okay. However, when she presented me with a handwritten letter and a gift for Father's Day, I was not in the mindset to appreciate it. I told her to keep it to herself, and her reaction shocked me. I noticed that she seemed hurt as she retreated to her room, and it was difficult to see her in that state. I couldn't help but wonder if I had been in the wrong for my reaction. The comments I received on the situation pointed out that while I said I had moved on, my actions suggested otherwise. It served as a reminder that anger and unresolved feelings can impact not only my life but also my relationship with my daughter. It's easy to say you've moved on, but how much do your actions really reflect those words? It's crucial to be honest with both yourself and her. You need to either fully move on or acknowledge that you haven't, but don't claim everything is okay while refusing a simple gift from your daughter. Consider her feelings. She's just a kid caught in the middle of a difficult situation between her parents. When making judgments, remember that very few adults would have the courage to speak up in such a complicated scenario. It's even harder for a child who likely doesn't want to hurt her dad. She needs your support and kindness to learn how to face life's challenges. It's understandable that you are hurt and upset by what happened, but think about your daughter's experience. She was terrified that her family might break apart, and now her worst fears have come true. You reassured her that things were fine, and then your actions contradicted that by disregarding her feelings. It's crucial to recognize the immense pressure she was under. Expecting a 17-year-old to take sides between her mother and father is unrealistic. She probably feared that if she chose one parent over the other, she would lose their love. It's not her fault that her mother had an affair. She is the innocent one caught in this emotional turmoil and deserves support during this tough time. After some reflection, you realize that rejecting your daughter's gift was a mistake. You felt guilty about how your actions affected her, and reading others' comments helped you see that you were in the wrong. You took a brave step by going to her room to apologize for the pain you caused. Seeing her in tears was difficult for you, and you made it clear that you regretted your words. During your conversation, you received her heartfelt gift and found it moving. You decided to cherish the letter she wrote, understanding that it represented her love and care. To make up for your mistake, you took her on a shopping trip to enjoy some quality time together, and later, you both went to the movies. It was great to see her happy again. You had another important conversation that evening where you assured her that none of this was her fault. She confessed she felt guilty for keeping her mother's affair a secret, even though she was upset with her mom for what happened. Your daughter worried that revealing the truth would cause even more chaos within the family. You reassured her that she should not carry any guilt. This is not her burden to bear, it's her mother's actions that created this situation. You both discussed her mother, and she came to a realization about what she has learned through this painful experience. She expressed a desire not to follow her mom's example as she grows up. You agreed, and you both acknowledged how unfortunate it is that she has to deal with such a difficult relationship with her mother. You also mentioned that both of you would benefit from individual therapy to help you navigate your feelings about the divorce and the impact of her mother's selfish choices. Your daughter was open to this idea, and now you will start searching for a therapist who can support both of you on your journeys to healing.